Hi. So the other day, House of Hauntology came up with a pretty interesting idea, a collaboration. Each one of us would produce or create a video taking on the following question. Does cosmic horror translate well to tabletop role-playing games? I think it's a very interesting topic. I have talked about cosmic horror every now and then, but with the passage of time, ideas tend to evolve and change. So this time I will try to give you my current opinion or outlook or perspective on that question. House of Hauntology is also going to, like I said, he's going to produce a video. The link to that video will be in the description below. He's going to upload it sometime this Sunday. As soon as it's up, I am going to put the link in the description. So please check it out because this collaboration is going to be a meshing or a synthesis of perspectives. Maybe he will talk about very different things compared to my video. I have no idea how he's going to approach this topic, so I'm pretty excited to see what sort of video he's going to produce. Maybe his points will support some of my points. Maybe his point of view is going to be quite different from my own perspective. So we shall see. Okay, cosmic horror. It's a pretty complex subject. Even after all of these years, I still feel like I have so much to learn about cosmic horror. I think I will try to approach this topic in a thematical and mechanical way, with details that have to do with the stories that you can create through role-playing games, but also through the rules that you can use to represent cosmic horror in the tabletop environment, or rather in the environment of your imagination as projected through role-playing games. Cosmic horror is truly it's very difficult to represent. You have already seen this in movies, in comic books. As soon as you try to communicate cosmic horror visually, some people could end up quite disappointed because the beauty of cosmic horror, well, part of the beauty is that many things about it are quite indescribable. You cannot clearly picture them. They are abstract concepts. So everybody has his or her own idea on what some sort of monster or energy or entity or even object is supposed to look. When it comes to literature, this is easier because you are reading the book. The letters are presenting certain tools for you to use in your mental process to come up with the right image to terrify yourself as you are enjoying that fiction. Or even if you are perhaps too jaded, you still feel some sort of fascination trying to visualize those abstract concepts. I think cosmic horror is quite intellectual by nature. That is, people that enjoy stories that have to do, yes, all sorts of books that have to do with, for example, vampires, mummies, werewolves. Those people may not necessarily enjoy cosmic horror because vampires, werewolves, mummies, zombies, etc., they have a certain graspable logic to them. A vampire. Maybe that person was a human before, and that person was bitten, and now he or she is a vampire. Or maybe it's a strange vampire species. They were always vampires from the start. Or maybe that person died, and through some sort of curse or ritual, he or she became a vampire. Werewolves. Maybe that person was bitten, and therefore contracted this sort of disease, lycanthropy, and now that person is a werewolf. mummies or zombies. They were corpses, and somehow they were reanimated through some sort of magic or through some sort of alien energy. It could be like that, perhaps a strange virus. So you have all sorts of explanations, some of them more plausible than others, but you still find a sense of logic. You recognize a certain mechanism that justifies the ability for that creature, the possibility for that creature to exist somehow. But when it comes to the cosmic horror, many of those entities, situations, energies, places, they break our entire conception of reality apart. What we know about physics, chemistry, geometry, it is all shattered. So when it comes to applying that in tabletop role-playing games, imagination, as many things related to role-playing games, is key to properly translate that into a tabletop environment. Many of those entities, monsters, they make no sense to us as human beings. It could be a creature that doesn't have a head, but maybe it never had a head. Instead, maybe it's like the Migo. It has some sort of like cilia or tentacles or antennae sprouting from the area where the head should be. And why is that? Maybe there are many pseudo-biological reasons within the fiction as to why that creature is built like that. But for a human, that seems impossible for a creature of that size to exist in that shape or form. Because if you take things to a microscopic level, there are some pretty weird microorganisms that they look like they could fit perfectly in a Lovecraftian tale. But many of those creatures, like the flying polyps, the shoggoths, and I'm using Lovecraftian examples because I consider Lovecraft to be perhaps the pinnacle of cosmic horror, at least personally. So you see all of those creatures. Do you remember the flying polyps? They left behind this sort of footprint. Even though they are flying, they are floating, and they don't seem fully within our material realm. They still leave that sort of like a paw print or footprint with 3 circles, if I remember correctly. So why is that? Is it related to some sort of propulsion mechanism, a biological mechanism of propulsion? Or is it that it has some sort of foot that is invisible to the human eye? So all of those things start to break our understanding of reality. This also appears in spells. All of those mythos spells, anything, even if you are not getting into the Lovecraftian side of cosmic horror, there are many other cosmic horror tales that have some unexplainable effects. They go beyond what we know as science. They make us think that perhaps there is an entire universe or a multiverse of things that we cannot understand through science. And that's when the true madness begins to seep in. That's why I think it is always necessary in a cosmic horror role-playing game to have some sort of way to represent this sanity, although there are some nuances to that, and I will try to explain in a few moments. But like I said, you suddenly realize that perhaps humanity is just one of many many realms. Not even as a species. Our human way of life is just one small aspect of an infinity of ways of existing. So all of that can break your mind apart. To truly experience cosmic horror when you are playing role-playing games, to truly represent the fear, the panic, the madness, the perplexity of your player character, you need to think about these things that are quite disturbing. There are people that read cosmic horror novels or watch movies, comic books, they play role playing games in this theme, in this genre, and they do not get scared. And that's because they don't truly think about those things. So I think it is essential that you rationalize that within a cosmic horror role playing game, there is something else besides that intellectual aspect. The intellectual aspect of cosmic horror is still very strong, but I've always considered that those creatures, Cthulhu, Nyarlathotep, all of those and their minions, the Star Spawn, other unrelated creatures like the Elder Things, the Great Race, they have certain patterns, certain shapes that could drive you mad. The closest example to that is, for example, those demonic sigils and symbols that you would see in grimoires that some occultists consider that their patterns start to reshape your brain in certain ways if you are not aware of it, if you are not steadfast. It changes your thought processes. So I've always considered that the horrors of the mythos, they have some way of affecting you at a deeper level. Sometimes it's not so much that you are afraid in a conventional sense of the creature that you encounter, but also that they are producing some sort of vibration, perhaps even some sort of strange, yes, like a radiation similar to nuclear energy perhaps, that starts to change you. And that would explain why certain characters, even though they are perhaps accustomed or used to encountering these creatures, they still get affected by them. For example, in the role-playing game Bloodlines and Black Magic, the characters are very capable. They are almost like occult superheroes. Perhaps since they were very young, they encountered these creatures from a very early age. So you would think maybe they should have grown accustomed to that. And that's why the Bloodlines and Black Magic game doesn't have a sanity system, because they are used to that. It's like their everyday life. Every day they have contacts with such things. But in the Bloodlines and Black Magic role-playing game, there is still a chance, depending on the entity, of the character being somewhat affected negatively. So there could be some insanity or fear-related effects, but it's not so much that the person is not emotionally or intellectually prepared to face that horror. Besides the existential implications that I mentioned, there is some strange energy or some pattern in the shape of the entities or any symbols or whatever that are changing the character that encounters those entities, those symbols, those energies. And back to spells, they simply do not fit our... Even though Lovecraft being he described himself as a materialist mechanicist, if I remember correctly, but he still, at one time, he had an altar dedicated to Pan. And he, based on some of his writings, well, you could say the entirety of his writings, but for example, the words that the main character pronounces it was the strange case of Charles Dexter Ward. That's Kabbalistic knowledge. Those are true words that you use in Kabbalah. So you can see that Lovecraft still had a certain idea that those spells weren't exactly within the realm of technology, at least as we know it as humans. It was something completely alien, completely otherworldly, or perhaps a bridge between worlds. So you never know how the character is going to be affected by those entities, by those symbols, by those energies. So cosmic horror, I think it translates better than when compared to other forms of entertainment. It translates better to tabletop role-playing games, but you need to put some work into it. You need a workable or practical sanity system, like the ones in like behind me. I have the books of Call of Cthulhu, Realms of Cthulhu, that you can use to play mythos sorts of adventures or campaigns using Savage Worlds. Those systems are mechanically sound, they work. It's another question entirely if some people consider them to be too cumbersome, but they accurately represent that fall into madness. Like I said, perhaps not so much because the character thinks so much about concepts that weren't meant to be known by the average human, but perhaps there is something else that is twisting the minds of the player characters. Now, when it comes to actually confronting cosmic horror, this is obviously going to present some penalties to the character. Even if you encounter, let's say, the typical Lovecraftian ghoul, there are many characters in role-playing games that could consider those creatures as normal enemies. Oh, it's a humanoid with the face of a deformed dog. But that in itself is pretty creepy because we are not used to seeing those things, of course. But then there is the intellectual side that the ghouls, they interact with the nightgowns. You know how nightgowns are very disturbing because they have no faces. They look kind of like these winged humanoids with long tails that they, for some reason, they like to tickle people. They molest people. They can drive them almost insane when they carry them and they tickle them for some reason. So it's a very intrusive sort of entity. And the ghouls, they know the pathways between our plane, our material plane, let's call it like that, and the dreamlands or the dream worlds, or however you want to call them. Let's call them the dreamlands since it's more classical. But what if those ghouls, because they are constantly moving between dimensions, and because they interact with the nightgowns, and perhaps because they eat flesh, usually cadavers, bodies, but they could also eat human beings, of course. Maybe all of that creates some sort of strange vibration that contaminates anyone who encounters them. And you could explain the damage to sanity, not just on the intellectual side, but also because of that sort of vibration or energy. So when it comes to role-playing games, because we are using our imagination all the time, because you are playing a role within that game, when you encounter those entities, everyone has his or her own idea on how they look. Even if the game master describes the creature in a certain way, cosmic horror is still very ambiguous when compared to other sorts of horror tales or adventures or whatever. Everyone can really get into some horrifying visualizations as long as you let your subconscious mind just take over and present those horrible visions to you. And I think the experience will be quite enjoyable because you play horror role-playing games to feel that sense of relief after getting scared. And there is a certain fascination, almost like a dreamlike quality, even if you consider yourself to be very, like I said, perhaps very difficult to scare, with letting other people scare you in a group situation, or if you are playing a solo role-playing game, sometimes even your own horrifying visions, they do not scare you so much, but there is still a certain fascination. Luckily, I can still scare myself quite a bit, so I still enjoy that aspect of horror role-playing games as a solo experience. But like I said, cosmic horror is truly something that fascinates you, that gets under your skin and makes you think about all sorts of existential possibilities. So in tabletop role-playing games, on the mechanical side, I think it's better to keep a sort of sanity or taint mechanic that affects your character. It also spices things up when it comes to encountering those creatures, those enemies. Now you're not just fighting them as the typical fantasy hero or weird fantasy hero. You are facing something that is so mind breaking, be it because of the intellectual side or this, like I said, this sort of projection, that the encounter is just so much, just more difficult than an average encounter in any other sort of role playing game. Well, thank you for watching this video, my take on things. Like I said, I still feel very much like there is so much for me to learn about cosmic horror. Even though I'm 39 years old, I still feel like I am going to learn so much more about it, even though I have been reading this since when I was in my early teenage years, and playing role-playing games, of course, and watching movies and reading comic books. There is still so much more. Perhaps in a few years, my take on things is going to be a bit different. So once again, thank you for watching this video. Remember to check out the House of Hauntology's take on things. The link will be in the description below. And thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending drive-through RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. And I would also like to know about your take on things. If you want to write a comment or make a video response with your own take on the cosmic horror, on how it applies to tabletop role-playing games. In my case, I think it applies well, but depending on the group, on how you handle the mechanics, what I said of the existential horror, and other considerations that I talked about in this video, well, it could turn out from being a poor session to an excellent, to one of the best sessions that you will ever run. So once again, thank you. Let me know your take on this complex subject, and see you later.